So today I'm going to be talking about the reduction of food waste. My name is Chris White, and together with Doortje the Wiljes and Gerdien den Heuvel, we set off on a 5-month study to basically try and address the idea of food waste. So how to reduce the total amount of food waste? Well, the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, estimated that globally 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted every year. That's from farm to fork, so that's all food production. The Institute of Mechanical Engineers put that figure at around 30 to 50% of all food produced does not reach the consumer's mouth. And they produced that in January 2013, and that really set off a lot of people's alarm bells. So a lot of people are trying to address this question. Our solution was a vertical food waste reduction model, and it really has to deal with supply chains, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But first I want to give you an introduction of food waste. I want to talk about the model and how we apply it to supply chains, and then 2 case studies, and then from there a couple conclusions. Here we can see tomatoes being wasted in the Canary Islands in Spain because that's more valuable to the farmers to leave it on the field than to take it to market because there's no price for them to do that. So one source of waste. So here we have production of food waste. And what we see is that waste is occurring throughout the world. So on the left, we're seeing kilograms of waste per person per year. And that's for consumers as well as production to retailer, so farm all the way to retailer. And what we see is that there's a lot in the consumer side in Europe and in North America, industrialized Asia. What we're also seeing is that waste also happens globally in the supply side, and that's why we really focus on this presentation and this report in the supply side of supply chains to try and tackle waste. But it should be noted that it is a significant issue. So food waste depends on location of crops and where they're produced. So if we focus on crops, what we're seeing is that if something's produced in the tropical regions compared to the temperate regions, it's causing a vast difference in how waste is generated, and that sometimes waste is generated more quickly in these tropical regions. Infrastructure is a huge factor depending on how good it is. If you have a really poor road system, it can lead to increased times for supply chains, for the product to move through the supply chains, as well as lead towards mechanical damage, let's say if you're transporting tomatoes. Microbial spoilage of crops is a huge thing. If herbicides and fungicides aren't used, or certain parties can't basically use these because they don't have access to them, it causes increased onsets of these spoilage organisms. And we talk about what type of production chain it is. So let's say if we go, for instance, to tomatoes, and we talk about a process chain where we have mechanical harvesters here seen in California taking up the entire product and then putting it in these containers and then taking it to a processing plant. This can take place over the course of as little as 4 hours. This is a huge contrast to a fresh chain in a developing world where you have hand picking going on, leading to baskets, and then these baskets being transported sometimes over 4 to 10 days across countries to get them to market. So even though we're still talking about tomatoes, it depends on if we're talking about fresh tomatoes, processed tomatoes, and where those supply chains are. So what we're really seeing is that in order to do a food waste study or to address food waste, we really need to look at each supply chain because every supply chain is unique. So how do we approach food waste in a supply chain? Well, we decided to focus on channel power because we felt channel power determines location of action. So location of basically taking action to address this question of food waste. So if we look on this figure right here, we see that we have farmers, transporters, processors, manufacturers, consumers, a typical supply chain. And this one's, for instance, is the California processed tomato chain. And on the x-axis, this is the number of stakeholders. So there's many stakeholders, a few manufacturers, and then only a couple processors, and then more transporters, more farmers. So we feel that when you map channel power, we're able to see that processors have the most ability to influence their relative stakeholders in the chain. So processors and manufacturers, and maybe even transporters, have the ability to influence their chain and basically make changes or deal with things as far as food waste is concerned. So we feel it's really important to map channel power first. If we look at the Dutch fresh tomato chain, we're seeing that there's only 5 major retailers in the Netherlands for tomatoes, and they therefore then have a lot of channel power and ability to influence their chain. The Nigerian fresh tomato chain is a different story because it's much harder to define where the channel power is. There's so many different stakeholders at every level. It's really undefined from a desk research level, but we do feel that there will be local actors that are where local channel power can be defined. So that'll either be family units or maybe individuals that are well respected within the chain. And those stakeholders then have the ability, I think, to influence the chain in a different way. But it's really important to determine where channel power is in order for some study or effort to be effective. So what is the vertical food waste reduction model? Well, it starts with initiation. So in this instance, we were the initiating party to basically try and tackle food waste within a supply chain. So you need an initiation party. That party needs to define where the channel power is to basically see which actors they can activate in order to make efforts. And then once that actor has been activated, they're able to conduct a food waste study. And food waste study is mapping of the entire chain for where the product travels, how much is wasted, the causes of waste. So this is different than vertical integration, where a company buys all the companies or subsidiaries before and after themselves. This is where a study is conducted across company boundaries, so it's quite unique in that factor. And then you need implementation. So once you have the food waste study, you basically make your implementation of your recommendations to reduce waste and increase revenue. So an example of application of this model to a chain is one, let's say, where we have farmers to processors to manufacturers, kind of a process chain. There's also a governing body because we know they have third-party influence, that they have rules and regulations on health standards and product standards. So once you define channel power, and let's say here it's at the manufacturer level, these parties then work together to share information towards a food waste study. Now it's noted here that in this instance the manufacturer is providing money. They're providing basically the funds to conduct this food waste study. And that's maybe most applicable for these larger chains and larger manufacturers that have the ability and channel power to conduct these food waste studies. Once the food waste study is conducted, it's analyzed into a business case, and then that business case is returned back to all the stakeholders as well as the governing body in the terms of recommendations for them to implement. We feel that this is very powerful for not only all parties because they can make more economic value of their products, but for the ones who are conducting this study, such as this manufacturer, it can lead to corporate social responsibility, which we know a lot of consumers are becoming more and more aware of and seeking out. It can also lead to a stronger supply chain. So if you're manufacturing goods and you're able to ensure the delivery of raw foods to your processing doors every day, it's in that party's best interest to make sure that that continues. So how do we apply this model in practice? Well, we have 2 case studies to show. One is the Nigerian fresh tomato chain, and the other is the California process chain. We did the fresh Dutch chain and did something on potatoes as well in India. We're not going to be talking about that today. The reason we want to show these 2 is not only to show how the model is applied across 2 different supply chains, but how within tomatoes we can see that two chains are fundamentally unique. So if we look at the Nigerian fresh tomato case study, well, let's first look at the steps. We're considered the initiation party at this point, as well as the ones who are conducting the food waste study. In future practices, it's important, of course, to identify who has the channel power, and thereby knowing who can implement the results. So we know that Nigeria produces 1.5 million tons of tomatoes every year, and they move that product from the north, where it's produced in the farms, down south, which takes about 4 days, to Lagos, the capital. And we also know from the food waste study that a lot of the literature points to a lot of waste at the farm. This is often due to the fact that farmers don't have access to equity, so they're not able to invest in temporary storage facilities, and oftentimes a lot of poor farming practices. So they're harvesting the product when it's already ripe, and so that causes the product to spoil before it can be moved. So there's a lot of reasons here that are contributing to waste at the farm level. It doesn't improve with transport because it also is estimated to be about 20%. Both of these over 300,000 tons of produce that's being damaged or wasted, and this is due to the fact that they're transported in palm baskets and taken across the country, and they experience significant amount of mechanical damage in transit. If we were able to make that product arrive at the markets, if they were able to realize less waste values, I mean, there's a potential profit there of $42 million. So there's significant spoilage across the chain here, and a real opportunity for reductions to be made. So if we go back to this idea of channel power, we see that it's very hard to define it from an outside perspective. But if you were able to make farmer cooperatives in which farmers were able to speak with one voice, they could apply for certain grants from the government. The government could do educational programs for these farmer cooperatives, which could then work on better harvesting techniques, and they could also pool their credit together. They might be able to buy temporary storage facilities, and if that were to happen, what we could see is we could see some definition of channel power, in which we'd really have an area then where you had pooled resources or pooled farmers together into these cooperatives, which could then start to influence the other stakeholders within the supply chain towards some positive end of food reduction. So in this instance, it might be valuable for an NGO or a governmental organization to see the value in working with the local communities to realize additional profit and equality for these farmers. Another case study we did was the California processed tomato case study, and here we're seeing a marked increase in the amount of tomatoes produced, almost 12 million tons. And we were initially hesitant to feel that we could find waste at this level, because it's in a process chain, an industrialized nation, and one might think that waste levels are quite low. Again, we talked a little bit earlier about how it happens. It's a very quick process from farm to these processing plants, and very mechanically driven. But even so, we were able to estimate that maybe up to 3% of green tomatoes are left on the field. And it's interesting about green tomatoes because a lot of the research says there might be increased toxins in the food or in green tomatoes, but all indications we've been able to find is that it still can be used as a food source in salsas and chutneys, and that it actually is being used as such. But this 3%, because it's such a large value that's being produced, this 3% also translates into about 300,000 tons, and equivalates for wealth for the farmers if they're able to actually use this product. It costs quite a bit for the transport, but that's for the transporters. They're able to make revenue, and for the processing, the gross value is quite high, And if you look at that, I mean, you're still getting a net production of $13 million based on a green tomato product. And the reason that green tomatoes might not be used is because the processor only demands red tomatoes. So the farmer only sends them red tomatoes, and there's no communication between farmer and processor across this line. But if you're able to do this food waste study, what we see is that you're able to see that you have a product that's not being used, and you might be able to find a use for it. So it shows that you need to have communication across company boundaries, and that there's really value in this idea. So some of the conclusions we've gotten from this study is, one, that food waste is a global problem, and it's present in all supply chains from farm to fork. So whether you're a consumer and you can benefit from meal planning, or making more awareness within your community of the food waste that is experienced in your household, or whether you're part of an NGO or a governmental body that deals with supply chains, or even a private company that's involved in the supply chain, there's many places where we can make changes here. We know that each supply chain is unique and requires a specific focus. We have these overarching ideas of what can reduce food waste, but until we look at each supply chain unto itself, we won't be able to address food waste on a real level until we're able to make that focus. And the application of the vertical food waste reduction model to a specific supply chain does work. All of these case studies we've been able to do are from desk research. So they're able to give us estimates, and these estimates are very positive in the sense that there's a lot of food waste and it can translate into a lot of reductions. But one would imagine if the vertical food waste reduction model is implemented by stakeholders themselves as it's designed to be implemented, you would really have complete information sharing within that supply chain, which would really yield additional insights in the implementation of those stakeholders who are involved. So you can find a copy of our report at this miner. We did the Tesla miner. And I thank you for your time, and have a great day, and hope you're able to get something out of it, and hope we can all make history of food waste.